My name is Lynne, and at 65 years old, I never expected to feel like an outsider at my only son James's wedding. The day started with such hope and joy as I watched my handsome boy commit to Amanda, a woman I had my doubts about from our first meeting. Something in her eyes when she looked at me always felt calculating, but I dismissed it as wedding jitters. That was until she cornered me at the reception with words that cut deeper than any knife could. If you're watching this, I wonder if you've ever felt pushed out of your child's life. Please hit subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because my story might help you avoid the mistake I almost made. James has always been my world. When his father passed away from a sudden heart attack, James was only 8 years old. We faced the grief together, just the two of us against a world that suddenly seemed much colder. I worked 2 jobs as an elementary school teacher during the day and waitressing on weekends to make sure he never felt the financial strain of being in a single-parent household. Those years were exhausting, but watching him grow into a thoughtful, intelligent young man made every sacrifice worthwhile. Throughout his childhood, we developed routines and traditions that bonded us. Sunday mornings were for pancakes and planning our week. Summer breaks meant road trips to national parks in our old station wagon, where we would camp under the stars and talk about everything and nothing. James was never the typical boy who shied away from showing emotion. He would tell me about his dreams, his fears, and as he grew older, his ambitions. His intelligence showed early. By 3rd grade, he was reading at a high school level, and I did everything I could to nurture his love of learning. I remember spending one entire tax refund on a computer when they were still a luxury item because his science teacher mentioned his aptitude for technology. That investment paid off when he earned a full scholarship to study computer science at the state university. Even during college, we remained close. He would call me several times a week, not because I insisted, but because he wanted to. He would share his exciting new discoveries in programming, or ask my opinion about handling situations with roommates or professors. I was always his sounding board, his safe harbor in any storm. After graduation, James landed a job at a software company that allowed him to work remotely. He chose to live just 30 minutes from me, and we would still meet for dinner almost every week. He was building his own life but never made me feel like I wasn't still an important part of it. Then, 3 years ago, at age 29, James met Amanda at a tech conference in Chicago. When he first mentioned her, his voice changed in a way I had never heard before. There was an excitement, almost a nervousness, that told me she was different from the few other women he had dated over the years. He showed me her picture on social media before their 3rd date. She was undeniably beautiful with long auburn hair, bright green eyes, and the kind of confident smile that commanded attention. When I finally met Amanda 2 months into their relationship, she was charming and articulate. She worked in marketing for a competing tech company, and her ambition was immediately apparent. She complimented my home, asked thoughtful questions about James as a child, and even brought me a lovely orchid plant. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But as the months passed, I began noticing subtle changes in James. Our weekly dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly, always with plausible excuses about work deadlines or other commitments. When we did meet, he checked his phone constantly, sometimes stepping away to take calls from Amanda that apparently could not wait. The first Christmas after they met, James informed me that he would be spending the holiday with Amanda and her family in their vacation home in Aspen. It was the first Christmas we had ever spent apart. I told him I understood, but the truth was, I spent that day alone, looking through old photo albums and trying not to feel sorry for myself. By the time they announced their engagement a year and a half after meeting, James and I were speaking less frequently than at any point since he left for college. Each time I expressed concern about our dwindling time together, he would reassure me that things were just busy, that nothing had changed in how he felt about me. I retired from teaching the year they got engaged, after 35 years educating 3rd graders. I had more free time than ever before, but less access to my son. I filled my days with volunteer work at the local literacy center, helping adults learn to read. It was fulfilling, but could not fill the growing void I felt, as James seemed to drift further away. When they announced their engagement, I was genuinely happy for them despite my reservations. James deserved love and companionship, and I wanted to believe that my concerns about Amanda were just the overprotective worries of a mother who had been her son's primary relationship for too long. I was determined to embrace this new chapter and welcome Amanda into our small family with open arms. I remember calling my sister Dorothy immediately after James told me about the proposal. Dorothy has always been my voice of reason, having raised 3 children of her own who were now married with children of their own. "It will be an adjustment," Dorothy told me. "But this is natural. You raised him well, and now he's creating his own family unit. That doesn't mean there isn't room for you too." I wanted so badly to believe her, to see Amanda as the daughter I never had, rather than someone who was taking my son away from me. With renewed determination, I decided to throw myself into supporting their wedding plans, hoping to bond with Amanda during what should be an exciting time for all of us. If only I had recognized the warning signs for what they truly were. The first indication that wedding planning would not be the bonding experience I had hoped for came when I called Amanda to offer my help with anything they needed. I expected gratitude, or at least polite acknowledgement. Instead, her tone was dismissive. "We have everything under control," she said. "My mother and I have already hired the best wedding planner in the city, but thank you for the offer." I tried not to feel hurt. After all, Amanda came from wealth. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Midwest, and her mother was a former beauty queen who now chaired various charity boards. They lived in a sprawling mansion in the wealthiest suburb of our city, a stark contrast to my modest 3-bedroom ranch house that I had finally paid off just before retirement. Still, I persisted. When I mentioned to James that I would love to be involved in some aspect of the wedding, he suggested I could help address invitations. I eagerly agreed, only to receive an email from Amanda's wedding planner informing me that they had hired a professional calligrapher instead. "Perhaps you could help with the welcome bags for out-of-town guests," the email suggested. It felt like being assigned the most menial task, but I swallowed my pride and agreed. Even that small responsibility was later rescinded when Amanda decided to hire her college sorority sister's event company to handle those details. 3 months before the wedding, I received an unexpected call from Amanda. My heart lifted, thinking perhaps she was finally reaching out to include me. "Lynne," she began, without the warmth one might expect when addressing a future mother-in-law, "I wanted to discuss the mother-son dance with you." "Yes, of course," I replied eagerly. "James and I haven't chosen a song yet, but I was thinking something classic like—" "Actually," she interrupted, "we're considering skipping that tradition. The father-daughter dance is really the important one, and having both might make the reception drag on too long." I felt as if I had been slapped. The mother-son dance was one of the few traditional moments I had been looking forward to, a public acknowledgement of the bond James and I shared. "Oh," was all I managed to say initially. Then, finding my voice, I added, "I think it would mean a lot to James. It's an important tradition." "Well, I'll discuss it with him," Amanda replied coolly. "But the timeline is already quite tight with all the other activities we have planned." When I spoke to James about it later that day, his response shocked me. "Mom, it's really not that big a deal. If it doesn't fit in the schedule, we can dance together any time. The wedding day is already going to be chaotic." I didn't recognize this version of my son, who could so casually dismiss something that I knew would have mattered to him before Amanda. It was as if he was reading from a script she had prepared. The guest list became another source of tension. I had submitted a modest list of 20 people, mostly former colleagues from the school where I had taught for decades, plus a few neighbors who had watched James grow up. When the invitations went out, I discovered that only 8 from my list had made the final cut. "We had to make tough decisions," James explained apologetically. "The venue has a strict capacity limit." Yet somehow, Amanda's side had over 150 guests, including business associates of her father and sorority sisters she had not spoken to in years. The message was clear. Her connections mattered more than mine. Perhaps the most hurtful incident during the planning process occurred during the one bridal shower I was invited to, hosted by Amanda's mother at their country club. I had purchased a beautiful silver picture frame and had it engraved with James and Amanda's names and wedding date. It was not the most expensive gift there, Certainly not compared to the crystal vases and designer kitchen appliances from Amanda's wealthy friends, but it was thoughtful and within my budget. When Amanda opened it, she smiled thinly and said, "How sweet. We'll find a place for it somewhere." She then quickly moved on to the next gift, leaving mine on the discard pile rather than displaying it with the others she had opened. Later that afternoon, I overheard Amanda's mother speaking to another guest. "Lynne's gift was nice enough, I suppose, but a bit conventional. Amanda's taste is much more modern and sophisticated." I pretended not to hear, but the sting of those words stayed with me for days. Throughout these months, my sister Dorothy remained my confidant and source of strength. After each slight or dismissal, I would call her, often in tears, questioning whether I was overreacting or being too sensitive. "You're not imagining things," Dorothy assured me, "but you need to choose your battles carefully. The wedding will come and go, but your relationship with James and Amanda will last a lifetime. Sometimes keeping the peace is more important than being right." I took her advice to heart, biting my tongue more often than not, telling myself that once the stress of wedding planning was over, things would improve. Amanda was just being a perfectionist bride, I reasoned. Many young women dream of their wedding day for years and become caught up in making everything match that vision. The rehearsal dinner was traditionally the responsibility of the groom's family, and I had been saving for years to host a lovely event. I had even researched venues and menus, wanting to contribute something meaningful to the wedding weekend. But 6 months before the wedding, James informed me that Amanda's parents had already booked a private room at the city's most exclusive restaurant for the rehearsal dinner. "But that's traditionally my responsibility," I protested. They insisted. "Mom," James said, not meeting my eyes, "Mr. Thompson wants to invite some business associates who are coming to the wedding, and the restaurant they chose can accommodate everyone." "I see," I said, feeling once again pushed aside. "And what would you like me to do instead?" James looked uncomfortable. "Maybe you could host a brunch for out-of-town family the day after the wedding? Something small at your house?" It was a consolation prize, and we both knew it. But I agreed because what other choice did I have? As the wedding day approached, I found myself increasingly sidelined in the preparations. I was not invited to the final menu tasting or the floral design appointment. When I asked if I could see Amanda's dress before the wedding, I was told that would ruin the surprise for everyone. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I lay awake in bed, a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I wanted so badly to be happy for my son, to embrace this new chapter in his life with genuine joy. But the persistent feeling of being pushed out, of being seen as an inconvenience rather than a valued family member, was impossible to ignore. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect September day with just a hint of autumn crispness in the air. I woke early, my stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Today my son would be married, a milestone I had both anticipated and dreaded. My sister Dorothy arrived at my house by 8, armed with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. At 68, 3 years my senior, Dorothy remained my rock, the one person who understood exactly what I was feeling without me having to explain. "Today is about James," she reminded me as she helped me zip up the navy blue dress I had purchased for the occasion. "Whatever happens with Amanda, however she or her family behave, remember that this is your son's special day." I nodded, blinking back tears as Dorothy fastened the pearl necklace that had belonged to our mother around my neck. I had worn the same pearls to James's high school graduation, his college graduation, and now his wedding, constant through all the changes in our lives. "You look beautiful," Dorothy assured me, adjusting a strand of my silver hair. A perfect mother of the groom. The wedding was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at the Grand Pavilion, the most exclusive event venue in our city. Amanda's parents had spared no expense, flying in a renowned florist from New York and hiring a string quartet that had once performed at the White House. Dorothy drove us to the venue, my hands clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. As we approached, I gasped at the transformation of the already beautiful space. Thousands of white roses and lilies adorned every surface. Crystal chandeliers had been brought in to supplement the existing lighting, and a custom-built arbor stood at the end of a white carpet that would serve as the aisle. "My goodness," Dorothy whispered. "It looks like something out of a movie." A wedding coordinator with an earpiece and clipboard intercepted us as we entered, consulting her list before directing us to a small anteroom designated for the groom's family. James was in a separate suite with his groomsmen, and I was told I could see him briefly before the ceremony. As I waited, Amanda's mother Sandra swept in, resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than 3 months of my pension. "Lynne, darling," she air-kissed somewhere near my cheek, her heavy perfume momentarily overwhelming me. "Isn't everything just divine? Amanda has such exquisite taste." "It's beautiful," I agreed sincerely. "The flowers are spectacular." "Yes, Vincenzo is a genius. We flew him in from Manhattan. He did Chelsea Clinton's wedding, you know." She patted my arm condescendingly. "Now, there's been a small change to the seating arrangements. We've had a last-minute RSVP from Amanda's godfather, a federal judge, so we'll need you to sit in the second row rather than the first. You understand, I'm sure." Before I could respond, she was gone in another waft of expensive perfume, leaving me standing there with my mouth open. Dorothy, who had overheard, came to stand beside me. "Breathe, Lynne. Just breathe." "Second row at my only son's wedding," I said, my voice tight with hurt. "While people James has never even met sit in the front." "I know," Dorothy squeezed my hand. "It's not right, but remember what matters today." I was finally allowed to see James about 30 minutes before the ceremony. When I entered the groom's suite, my heart swelled with pride. My son stood before a mirror, tall and handsome in his tuxedo, the spitting image of his father on our wedding day 33 years earlier. "James," I said softly. He turned, his face breaking into the smile I had loved since he was a baby. "Mom?" He crossed the room and embraced me tightly. For a moment, it was just the two of us again, the way it had been for so many years. "You look so handsome," I said, straightening his already perfect tie. "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become." His eyes softened at the mention of his dad. "I wish he could be here." "He is in a way." I touched the silver cufflinks James wore, ones that had belonged to his father, "and so am I. Always." "I know, Mom." He squeezed my hands. "Thank you for everything. For raising me, for supporting me, for being here today." I wanted to say more, to ask if he was truly happy, if he was certain about Amanda. But this was not the time for such questions, not minutes before he would walk down the aisle. "I love you, James," I said simply. "Love you too, Mom," he replied, and for that brief moment, he was my little boy again. The ceremony itself was undeniably beautiful. Amanda was a stunning bride in a couture gown with a cathedral-length train carried by 2 flower girls. James's face, as she walked down the aisle, showed nothing but adoration and joy. Whatever my misgivings about Amanda, I could not deny that my son loved her deeply. From my position in the second row, partially blocked by Amanda's cousin's enormous hat, I watched as they exchanged vows they had written themselves. James's were heartfelt and sincere, speaking of partnership and growth together. Amanda's were more performative, drawing appreciative murmurs and even a few tears from the assembled guests. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and James kissed his bride, I clapped and smiled along with everyone else, pushing aside my hurt feelings and focusing on my son's happiness. This day was about him, not me, and I was determined to remember that. As the newlyweds recessed back down the aisle, James caught my eye and winked, a small private gesture that warmed my heart. Perhaps things would be okay after all. Perhaps once the wedding was over, once Amanda no longer had the stress of planning such an elaborate event, our relationship could improve. I clung to that hope as we moved from the ceremony to the cocktail hour and then to the reception. I did not yet know that the worst moment of the day was still to come. The reception was held in the Grand Pavilion's ballroom, a vast space transformed into a winter wonderland theme despite the September date. Crystal and silver decorations caught the light from hundreds of candles and overhead chandeliers, creating a magical atmosphere that drew gasps from guests as they entered. I quickly discovered that I had been seated at a table far from the bridal party, alongside distant relatives of Amanda's and a couple of James's colleagues I had never met. Dorothy, thankfully, was at the same table, a small mercy in what was becoming an increasingly uncomfortable day. "They've put us in Siberia," Dorothy muttered under her breath as we found our assigned seats. At least we're together, I replied, determined to maintain a positive attitude despite the clear message being sent by our table assignment. The meal was extravagant, course after course of gourmet food accompanied by fine wines I could never have afforded. Throughout the dinner, I watched the head table where James and Amanda sat surrounded by her parents, the best man, and the maid of honor. My exclusion from that inner circle stung, another reminder that I was not considered a central figure in this celebration. After dinner came the traditional speeches. Amanda's father went first, a polished performance that spoke more about the Thompson family legacy and success than about the couple themselves. The best man, James's college roommate, gave a heartfelt but appropriately humorous toast that had everyone laughing. Then, to my surprise, James stood and approached the microphone. Before we move on to the dancing portion of the evening, there's one more person I'd like to invite to speak. His eyes found me across the room. Mom, would you come up here, please? A murmur rippled through the crowd as I stood, shocked and unprepared. I had not been told I would be speaking and had prepared nothing. As I made my way to the front of the room, I caught a glimpse of Amanda's face. Her smile was fixed, but her eyes were cold with obvious displeasure at this deviation from her carefully planned program. James handed me the microphone and kissed my cheek. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. Facing the sea of faces, many unfamiliar to me, I took a deep breath and spoke from my heart. When James was 7 years old, he came home from school one day and announced that he was going to invent a time machine when he grew up. Not because he wanted to see the future, but because he wanted to go back and meet his father, who had passed away before James could form memories of him. I saw James swallow hard at this recollection. I told him that while I couldn't give him a time machine, I could tell him stories and show him pictures so his father would always be part of his life. James looked at me so seriously and said, "That's okay, Mom. You're enough family for both of you." A collective awe rose from the audience, and I continued, gaining confidence. For many years, it was just the two of us, facing life's challenges together. And now, James has chosen to expand our small family by bringing Amanda into his heart. While no mother finds it easy to step back as the primary woman in her son's life, I am grateful that he has found someone who makes him happy. This was a diplomatic stretch, but I was determined to be gracious. James grew into a man any parent would be proud of, kind, intelligent, and loyal. Amanda, you are receiving a tremendous gift in my son. Treasure him as I have, and know that you are now part of our family too. I raised my glass. To James and Amanda, may your life together be filled with joy, growth, and unconditional love. The crowd applauded warmly, and James embraced me tightly, whispering, "Thank you," in my ear. Amanda's smile remained fixed, her eyes never meeting mine as she accepted my toast with a stiff nod. As I returned to my seat, Dorothy squeezed my hand. "Perfectly done," she whispered, gracious but authentic. The DJ announced that it was time for the father-daughter dance. Amanda and her father took the floor, performing what looked like a choreographed routine to Butterfly Kisses, a popular choice that had many guests dabbing at their eyes. When they finished to enthusiastic applause, the DJ said, "And now, the groom would like to share a dance with his mother." I looked up in surprise. After Amanda's attempt to eliminate this tradition, I had assumed it had been cut from the program. James appeared at my table, hand extended. "May I have this dance, Mom?" he asked with a warm smile. As we moved to the center of the dance floor, the opening notes of "What a Wonderful World" began to play, a song I used to sing to James as a lullaby when he was small. My eyes filled with tears at his thoughtful choice. "Thank you for insisting on this," I said quietly as we danced. "Some traditions are worth keeping," he replied, "and this one means a lot to me too." Over James's shoulder, I could see Amanda standing with her bridesmaids, her expression tight with displeasure. When our dance concluded, James kissed my cheek and was immediately swept back into the crowd of well-wishers, leaving me to make my way back to my table alone. The evening progressed with more dancing, the cutting of an elaborate 7-tier cake, and the constant circulating of champagne. I noticed Amanda becoming increasingly animated as she consumed several glasses, her laugh growing louder, her gestures more expansive. I had just returned from the restroom and was making my way through a relatively quiet hallway adjacent to the ballroom when I heard Amanda's voice. There she is, the mother who just could not stick to the plan. I turned to find Amanda approaching, flanked by 3 of her bridesmaids, all of them slightly unsteady on their feet from champagne. "Amanda," I acknowledged with a nod, trying to move past them. She stepped directly into my path, her perfect makeup not quite concealing the flush of alcohol and emotion on her face. "That speech wasn't on the approved list," she said, her tone accusatory. "Neither was that dance. James knows how tight our schedule is tonight." "James wanted those moments," I replied calmly, "and they're traditional parts of any wedding." "Well, things are different now," Amanda said, her voice taking on a cruel edge I had not heard before. "Now we have our own family. I am the main one in his life, and you are superfluous." The word hung in the air between us, ugly and deliberate. Superfluous, unnecessary, excessive. "That's a very hurtful thing to say," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's just reality," Amanda continued, emboldened by her friend's snickering and the alcohol in her system. "James and I will be making our own traditions now. We'll be spending holidays at my family's homes, of course. If you want to see James, you'll need to check with me first. I can't have you just dropping by our new house whenever you feel like it." One of her bridesmaids, a tall blonde with a mean smile, added, "Family boundaries are so important for newlyweds." "Exactly, Brittany," Amanda nodded vigorously. "Boundaries. Like, we'll let you know when you can visit, and it will have to be brief. No more of those long Sunday brunches James told me about." The casual cruelty took my breath away. I had suspected Amanda resented my relationship with James, but hearing it stated so bluntly, on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life, was devastating. "I understand you want to establish your own household," I said, fighting to keep my composure. "But James is still my son." "And he's my husband now," Amanda smirked, leaning in closer. "My husband, my family. You had him for 32 years, now he's mine." Her friends laughed as if she had said something clever rather than unspeakably cruel. I stood frozen, feeling tears threatening but refusing to let them fall in front of this woman who seemed to take pleasure in my pain. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening," I said with as much dignity as I could muster, finally stepping around their group and walking away, their laughter following me down the hallway. I found the nearest restroom and locked myself in a stall, finally letting the tears come. I had faced many challenges in my life, but few had cut as deeply as Amanda's words. The deliberate attempt to separate me from my son, to cast me as an outsider, an inconvenience to be managed rather than family to be embraced, felt like a physical blow. After several minutes, there was a soft knock on the stall door. "Lynne, are you in there? It's Dorothy." I opened the door to find my sister's concerned face. One look at me, and she knew something was terribly wrong. "What happened?" she asked, pulling me into a hug. Between sobs, I recounted Amanda's cruel words and the laughing agreement of her friends. Dorothy's expression hardened, anger replacing concern. "That entitled little princess has gone too far." "Who does she think she is?" "James's wife," I said miserably. "That's who she is now. Being his wife doesn't give her the right to try to cut you out of his life. James would never agree to that. Would he even know? She's clearly been working to limit our time together for months. What if this is just the beginning?" Dorothy took me by the shoulders, her gaze steady and determined. "Then you have a choice to make, Lynne. You can accept what's happening and gradually be pushed further and further from James's life, or you can stand up for yourself right now." "I don't want to cause a scene at his wedding," I protested weakly. "I'm not suggesting a scene," Dorothy replied. "I'm suggesting an honest conversation. James deserves to know what his new wife just said to his mother." I hesitated, torn between my desire to protect James's happiness and my growing realization that silence would only embolden Amanda further. "I think I need to leave early," I said finally. "I can't face her again tonight." Dorothy shook her head firmly. "Running away solves nothing. If you leave now, Amanda wins. Is that what you want? For her to think she can intimidate you into disappearing from James's life?" Her words struck home. Throughout my life, I had faced challenges head-on. I had raised a son alone, built a career, created a stable home despite financial struggles. Why was I now considering retreat in the face of a bully? "You're right," I said, squaring my shoulders and wiping away the last of my tears. "This needs to be addressed now, not allowed to fester." As we left the restroom, a plan was forming in my mind. This would require timing, courage, and something else. Something I had not originally planned but now seemed necessary given the circumstances. I was about to make a stand that would change everything. My hands trembled as Dorothy and I made our way back to the reception. The music pulsed through the grand ballroom as guests danced and celebrated, unaware of the drama unfolding at the margins of the festivities. I spotted James near the bar, laughing with groomsmen, looking happier than I had seen him in months. For a moment, my resolve faltered. Who was I to potentially disrupt his wedding day? But then I caught sight of Amanda, holding court with her bridesmaids, shooting a triumphant glance my way when our eyes met. The memory of her cruel words strengthened my determination. "I need to speak with James alone first," I told Dorothy. "And then both of them together." Dorothy nodded. "I'll run interference if anyone tries to interrupt you." As I approached James, he turned and his smile widened. "Mom, are you having a good time?" I forced a smile. "James, could I speak with you privately for a moment? It's important." His expression shifted to concern. "Is everything okay?" "Just a few minutes," I assured him, leading him toward a small anteroom off the main ballroom that I had noticed earlier. Once inside with the door closed, James turned to me. "What's going on? You seem upset." I took a deep breath. "James, I need to ask you something important, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you and Amanda discussed limiting my role in your lives after the wedding?" His brow furrowed. "What? No, of course not. Why would you ask that?" "Because I just had a very disturbing conversation with Amanda. She told me that I'm superfluous now that you two have your own family, that I'll need to check with her before seeing you, and that your traditions with me are going to end." James's face registered shock, then disbelief. "Mom, that doesn't sound like Amanda. She knows how important you are to me. Maybe you misunderstood?" The suggestion that I had somehow misconstrued such explicit statements stung, but I kept my voice calm. I wish that were the case. But her words were very clear, and her friends were there laughing along with her. "She's been drinking champagne all night," James said, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe she said something she didn't mean." "James," I said gently but firmly, "this isn't just about tonight. You must have noticed how I've been increasingly excluded throughout the wedding planning, how our time together has diminished since you met Amanda. This feels like the culmination of a pattern, not an isolated incident." He started to respond, then stopped, a troubled look crossing his face. "Let me talk to her." "Actually, I think we should talk to her together," I suggested. "I don't want this to be a case of," she said. "We need clarity about what the future looks like for all of us." James hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the prospect of conflict on his wedding day. But to his credit, he nodded. "You're right, let me find her." He stepped out briefly and returned with Amanda, whose pleasant expression immediately hardened when she saw me. "James says you have some concerns," she said coolly. "Amanda," I began, keeping my voice level. "I want to discuss what you said to me in the hallway earlier." "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone dismissive. "You said that I'm superfluous now, that you and James are married, that I'll need to check with you before seeing my son, and that our family traditions would be ending." Amanda's eyes widened slightly before she composed herself. "I think you misunderstood what was clearly a joke, Lynne. We'd all had a bit of champagne and were just being silly." "It didn't sound like a joke," I said. "Neither did your friend's comments about setting boundaries to keep me at a distance." "James," Amanda turned to him, her eyes suddenly glistening with tears. "Can you believe this? On our wedding day? Your mother is trying to create drama over something I don't even remember saying." James looked torn, glancing between his new wife and his mother, clearly struggling with who to believe. "It wasn't a joke, and I can prove it," I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out my phone. I had just spoken to Dorothy on the phone right before our encounter and never ended the call. Amanda's face paled as I pulled up the voice recording application and hit play. Her voice, slightly distant but unmistakable, filled the small room. Now we have our own family. I am the main one in his life, and you are superfluous. Then her friend's voice. Family boundaries are so important for newlyweds. And Amanda again. Exactly, Brittany. Boundaries. Like, we'll let you know when you can visit, and it will have to be brief. No more of those long Sunday brunches James told me about. I had not planned to record our conversation. It was pure chance that my call with Dorothy had still been running when Amanda confronted me. But the evidence was undeniable. James's face transformed as he listened, shock giving way to anger. Amanda, is this real? Did you actually say these things to my mother? Amanda's tearful act vanished instantly, replaced by defensive anger. You're recording conversations at our wedding? She snapped at me. That's a new low. It was accidental, I explained. But that's beside the point. Those are your words, Amanda. That's how you truly feel about my place in James's life, isn't it? So what if I do? Amanda's mask had fully slipped now, her voice hard and cold. It's completely normal for a wife to become the priority in her husband's life. Your constant presence, your weekly brunches, your daily phone calls, they're excessive. James is a grown man who doesn't need his mommy hovering around anymore. The cruelty of her words hung in the air between us. I maintained my composure, though it took every ounce of strength I possessed. James stared at his new wife as if seeing her for the first time. Amanda, my relationship with my mother is not up for negotiation. She raised me alone after my father died. We're close because we went through difficult times together, not because she's hovering or excessive. James, Amanda's tone softened as she turned to him, placing a hand on his arm. I just want us to have our own life, our own traditions. Surely you understand that. What I understand, James replied, gently removing her hand, is that you've been manipulating situations to exclude my mother for months, and now I find out you've been planning to cut her out of our lives entirely. I never said that, Amanda protested. You called her superfluous, James reminded her. You said she'd need your permission to see me. How is that not cutting her out? A knock at the door interrupted the tense standoff. Dorothy peeked in. Everything okay in here? People are starting to wonder where the bride and groom have disappeared to. We'll be out in a minute, James assured her, his voice tight with controlled anger. After Dorothy withdrew, James turned to both of us. This is not how I envisioned spending my wedding night, mediating between my wife and my mother. But let me make something absolutely clear. I will not choose between you. I love you both, and I expect you both to be part of my life. He looked directly at Amanda. My mother will always be welcome in our home without having to check with you first. Our Sunday brunches will continue when possible. The holidays will be shared fairly. Then he turned to me. And Mom, I need you to understand that Amanda is my wife now. Our marriage needs space to grow, and that means some changes to how frequently we see each other. Not because you're not important, but because that's the natural evolution of life. I nodded, accepting the reasonable boundaries he was setting. I understand, James. I've never wanted to interfere with your marriage. I just want to remain part of your life. Amanda's face had shifted through several emotions during James's speech, finally settling into a tight, controlled expression. Fine, she said curtly, but we should get back to our guests. We can discuss this later. One more thing, James said, his voice soft but firm. Amanda, I expect you to apologize to my mother for what you said. Amanda's eyes widened. Now? You want me to apologize now? In the middle of our wedding? Yes, James said simply. What you said was hurtful and wrong. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. But then, seeing the determination in James's expression, Amanda turned to me. Lynne, I apologize for my comments. They were inappropriate. The words were correct, but her tone lacked any genuine remorse. Still, it was a start. Thank you, Amanda, I replied with dignity. I accept your apology. James nodded, seemingly satisfied with this temporary resolution. Now let's get back to our guests before they send a search party. As we prepared to return to the reception, Amanda leaned close to James, whispering something that made his expression darken again. I couldn't hear what she said, but his response was clear enough. We'll discuss this later, Amanda. Right now, we have responsibilities to our guests. The three of us walked back into the ballroom, a fragile truce established, but the underlying issues far from resolved. The facade of the perfect wedding day had cracked, revealing complications that would need to be addressed in the days and weeks to come. As the evening progressed, I maintained a dignified presence, dancing with friends, chatting with guests, and avoiding direct interaction with Amanda or her parents. James made a point of checking on me several times, his concerned eyes asking if I was okay. I was far from okay, but I was standing my ground, and for now, that was enough. The remainder of the reception unfolded with an undercurrent of tension invisible to most guests, but painfully apparent to those of us involved in the earlier confrontation. Amanda maintained her bride persona, smiling for photographs and dancing with her father, but her eyes conveyed cold fury whenever they landed on me. James moved between his various responsibilities with the strained politeness of someone trying desperately to salvage a special day that had veered off course. I had just finished a conversation with one of James's colleagues when Amanda's mother approached me, her perfectly maintained appearance betrayed only by the tight lines around her mouth. "Lynne," Sandra's voice was pitched low but sharp. "Amanda is very upset." "What exactly did you say to her?" I met her gaze steadily. "I think you should ask Amanda what she said to me. She mentioned something about you recording a private conversation? That seems rather underhanded, doesn't it?" "It wasn't intentional," I explained calmly. "But it did capture some very concerning statements about her plans to restrict my relationship with my son." Sandra's expression hardened. "Young couples need their space, Lynne. Surely you understand that James's primary loyalty should be to his wife now?" "Loyalty isn't a zero-sum game," I replied. "James can be devoted to his wife and still maintain a close relationship with his mother. In our family," Sandra said with unmistakable condescension, "we believe in clear boundaries. Robert's mother understood this when we married. She never interfered in our lives, never expected weekly visits or constant phone calls. Perhaps your relationship with your mother-in-law was different than what James and I share," I suggested. "Every family dynamic is unique." "Indeed," Sandra said with a tight smile. "And you would do well to accept that your dynamic with James is changing, whether you like it or not." Before I could respond, Robert Thompson joined us, placing a proprietary hand on his wife's shoulder. "Everything okay here, ladies?" "Perfectly fine," Sandra replied. "Just having a little mother-to-mother chat with Lynne." Robert turned his attention to me, his businessman's smile not reaching his eyes. "Lynne, I understand there was some confusion earlier between you and Amanda?" "There was no confusion," I said firmly. "Your daughter explicitly told me that I am superfluous in my son's life now that they're married." Robert's smile faltered slightly. "Well, weddings are emotional times. I'm sure Amanda was just establishing healthy expectations for their marriage." "There was nothing healthy about what she said," I responded. "And I won't be pushed out of my son's life." "No one is pushing," Robert's tone hardened. "But surely you understand that your role is now secondary? James has a new family now." "He has an expanded family," I corrected. "I am still very much his family too." Robert leaned in, his voice dropping. "Listen carefully, Lynne. Amanda is our only daughter, and her happiness is paramount to us. We've invested considerably in this wedding and in the couple's future. James has promising career prospects that could benefit greatly from my connections in the business world. It would be a shame if tensions with his mother complicated that potential." The implied threat was clear and despicable, using financial leverage to pressure my son's relationship with me. "Are you suggesting that your support for James is contingent on him distancing himself from me?" I asked, making no effort to hide my disgust. "I'm merely pointing out the realities of the situation," Robert replied smoothly. "Successful marriages require certain adjustments, certain priorities. My relationship with my son is not a business negotiation," I said, my voice low but firm, "and I don't respond well to threats, veiled or otherwise." A commotion across the room interrupted our tense exchange. James and Amanda appeared to be in the midst of a heated discussion, her hand gripping his arm as she spoke animatedly. Even from a distance, the body language was concerning. Robert and Sandra quickly excused themselves and moved toward their daughter. I remained where I was, not wanting to escalate the situation further. Dorothy appeared at my side. "The Thompson parents giving you trouble?" Trying to, I sighed. Apparently their financial support comes with conditions. Despicable, Dorothy muttered. But not surprising given how they've raised their daughter. We watched as the conversation across the room grew more intense. Amanda was now clearly crying, while James stood rigid, his face set in lines of frustration and anger. Several guests had noticed the discord, exchanging uncomfortable glances and discreetly moving away from the newlyweds. Amanda suddenly pulled away from James and rushed toward the ladies' room, her bridesmaids immediately converging to follow her. Sandra shot a venomous look in my direction before hurrying after her daughter. James stood alone for a moment, his shoulders slumped, before straightening and making his way through the crowd toward me. "James," I said when he reached us, "I'm so sorry if I've caused problems." "You haven't," he said firmly. "Amanda's parents told her about their conversation with you. Apparently, they suggested that they might withhold the down payment they promised for our house if we didn't, and I quote, get you under control." My shock must have shown on my face. "Yeah," James continued, his expression grim. "Turns out financial manipulation is a family specialty. Amanda's upset because I told her father exactly what I thought of his threats." "Oh, James," I sighed. "The last thing I wanted was to create conflict between you and Amanda's family." "You didn't create this, Mom," James said. "They did, with their entitled attitudes and their belief that they can buy compliance. I've spent the last hour learning things about my new in-laws that I wish I'd known before today." "What happens now?" I asked, concerned about the implications for his marriage barely hours old. "Now," James ran a hand through his hair, "I try to salvage what's left of this reception. Amanda and I will have a lot to discuss later, but for now, we put on brave faces and get through the evening." "Should I leave? Would that make things easier?" James shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. You belong here as much as anyone, and if you left now, it would only reinforce their belief that they can push you out." He glanced at his watch. "We have about 2 more hours before the reception ends. Then Amanda and I leave for the hotel before our flight tomorrow. I've already told her that we'll need to postpone some serious conversations until after the honeymoon." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. Amanda eventually emerged from the restroom, her makeup impeccably repaired, and resumed her role as the beaming bride, though she and James maintained a noticeable distance from each other. The traditional activities continued: the bouquet toss, the removal of the garter, the final dances, all performed with mechanical precision rather than joy. As the reception drew to a close, guests lined up to bid farewell to the newlyweds before their departure. When my turn came, I approached with some trepidation. "Congratulations again," I said, embracing James warmly. "Thanks, Mom," he replied, holding me perhaps a moment longer than usual. "I'll call you when we get back." I turned to Amanda, unsure of what to say after everything that had transpired. She solved the dilemma by extending her hand for a formal handshake rather than the customary hug between bride and mother-in-law. "Thank you for coming, Lynne," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Thank you for including me," I replied with equal restraint, accepting the handshake with dignity. As I stepped away to allow the next guests their turn, I caught a glimpse of Sandra Thompson watching the exchange, her expression calculating. Whatever peace had been established was clearly temporary, a ceasefire rather than a resolution. Dorothy and I left shortly after, both emotionally exhausted from the day's unexpected drama. "What do you think will happen now?" Dorothy asked as we drove away from the venue. "I don't know," I admitted. "James seems determined to establish boundaries with Amanda's parents, but that won't be easy given their financial involvement in the couple's future." "And Amanda herself?" I sighed deeply. "That's the real question, isn't it? Was today just wedding stress bringing out the worst in her, or is this who she truly is? And either way, what does that mean for James's happiness?" "At least he knows where you stand," Dorothy said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You didn't back down, and you didn't cause a scene. You handled it with grace and strength." "I just hope I didn't damage his marriage on its very first day," I said, the weight of the day's events settling heavily on my shoulders. "If anything damaged their marriage today," Dorothy replied firmly, "it was Amanda's cruel words and her parents' manipulative behavior, not your reasonable desire to remain part of your son's life. As we pulled into my driveway, the house dark and quiet after the day's festivities, I wondered what the coming weeks and months would bring. The wedding day that should have been a joyful beginning had instead exposed fault lines that ran deep through my son's new family connections. All I knew for certain was that I had stood my ground with dignity, refusing to be erased from my son's life by anyone, no matter how wealthy or influential they might be. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same strength and grace that had carried me through today's unexpected battle. The weeks following the wedding were strained, to say the least. James and Amanda departed for their 2-week honeymoon in Bali the morning after the reception, leaving behind a tangle of unresolved tensions and unanswered questions. I received only 2 brief texts from James during that time, generic messages about beautiful beaches and delicious food, nothing that addressed the wedding day confrontation or what might lie ahead. When they returned, I maintained a respectful distance, waiting for James to reach out when he was ready. It was the hardest form of patience I had ever practiced, fighting against my maternal instinct to check on him, to make sure he was okay. But I knew that giving him space was essential, that whatever conversations needed to happen had to unfold on his timeline, not mine. The call came 3 weeks after the wedding. James asked if we could meet for coffee, just the 2 of us. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe midway between our homes, neutral territory for what promised to be a difficult conversation. He looked tired when he arrived, shadows under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. But he smiled genuinely when he saw me, enfolding me in a warm hug that eased some of my anxiety. "How are you, Mom?" he asked, as we settled at a corner table with our drinks. "I'm fine," I replied. "But more importantly, how are you?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I had known since his childhood, a sign of inner turmoil seeking expression. "It's been a challenging few weeks," he admitted. "Amanda and I have had a lot to work through." "I can imagine," I said softly. "James, I want you to know that I never intended to create problems on your wedding day." "You didn't create the problems, Mom," he said firmly. "You just brought them to the surface. And painful as that was, I'm actually grateful." "You are?" "Yes," he nodded. "Because it forced conversations that needed to happen, not just between you and Amanda, but between Amanda and me, and between us and her parents." He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "After the honeymoon, we had a serious talk about her comments to you and her parents' behavior. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." "What happened?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Amanda admitted that she's always been jealous of our relationship. She didn't have that kind of closeness with her own parents growing up. They were always busy with work or social obligations, leaving her with nannies and later boarding school. She saw our weekly brunches and daily calls as threatening, as competition she couldn't win. "That wasn't my intention at all," I said. "I know that, and deep down, so does she. But emotions aren't always rational." James paused, collecting his thoughts. "As for her parents, we've established some firm boundaries. They offered us that down payment for the house with strings attached, so we declined it." "James," I gasped, knowing what a financial sacrifice that represented. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, we did," he said with surprising resolve. "I won't have our marriage begin with financial control from her parents. We're looking at smaller homes now, something we can afford on our own. It means delaying some of our plans, but our independence is worth it." I felt a surge of pride in my son's determination to stand on his own feet, to resist the golden handcuffs that Amanda's parents had tried to fasten around their wrists. "And Amanda? How does she feel about all this?" "It's been hard for her," James admitted. "She's never defied her parents before. But I think she's also experiencing a kind of freedom she hasn't known, making decisions based on what we want rather than their expectations." "And what about us?" I asked hesitantly. "You and me?" "That's one of the main things I wanted to talk about today," James said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Amanda and I have agreed that Sunday brunches twice a month would be a good compromise. Not every week like before, but not the complete cutoff she originally wanted." "That sounds very reasonable," I said, relief washing through me. "What about holidays?" "We'll alternate Thanksgiving and Christmas between both families, and we'd like to establish some new traditions that include everyone for other occasions." He squeezed my hand. You're still my mother, Mom. That doesn't change because I got married. Tears pricked at my eyes. Thank you, James. That means everything to me. We continued talking for nearly 2 hours, working through practical arrangements and emotional concerns. It wasn't a perfect resolution, more like the beginning of a new understanding that would require ongoing effort from all parties. But it was a start, a foundation we could build upon. Over the following months, we settled into a new rhythm. The twice-monthly brunches became a fixture, sometimes with Amanda joining us, sometimes just James and me. Those solo brunches were precious, a continuation of our tradition, while respecting the boundaries of his marriage. 6 months after the wedding, Amanda and I had our own breakthrough. She asked if we could meet for lunch, just the two of us. I agreed with some trepidation, unsure of what to expect. I want to apologize properly, she said, once we were seated at the restaurant. Not the forced apology at the wedding, but a real one. What I said to you was cruel and inexcusable. I was insecure and afraid of losing James's attention, but that doesn't justify my behavior. Her sincerity surprised and touched me. Thank you, Amanda. That means a lot to me. I've been seeing a therapist, she continued, trying to understand why I felt so threatened by your relationship with James. A lot of it goes back to my own childhood, feeling like I was never the priority for my parents. I can understand that, I said gently. Family patterns run deep. They do, she agreed. But I'm trying to create healthier ones now. She hesitated before adding, I don't expect us to become best friends overnight. There's been too much hurt for that. But I do want us to find a way forward, for James's sake and for our own. It was the most human I had ever seen her, vulnerable and authentic in a way that her perfectly curated wedding persona had never been. In that moment, I glimpsed the woman my son had fallen in love with, beneath the defensive layers and learned behaviors. I would like that too, I told her sincerely. 1 year after the wedding, our fragile peace was tested by unexpected news. Amanda was pregnant. The prospect of becoming a grandmother brought me immeasurable joy, but also anxiety about how the new dynamic would affect the careful balance we had established. To my surprise and relief, Amanda reached out to me during her second trimester, asking if I would help prepare the nursery. It was an olive branch, an acknowledgement that my experience as a mother had value. We spent weekends painting walls and assembling furniture, our conversations gradually becoming easier, more natural. Did James's father live to see him born? She asked one afternoon as we arranged stuffed animals on a shelf. No, I said, the old grief softened by time but still present. He died when I was 7 months pregnant. James never knew his father. That must have been incredibly difficult, Amanda said, genuine empathy in her voice, facing parenthood alone. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, I admitted, but also the most rewarding. She placed a protective hand over her growing belly. I can't imagine doing this without James. You must have been so strong. In that moment of shared vulnerability, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. A mutual recognition of the fierce love that drove both our actions, however misguided mine in protectiveness or hers in possessiveness might have been. When Thomas James Thompson was born on a snowy February morning 2 years after the wedding, I was at the hospital, invited by both parents to welcome my grandson into the world. Holding that tiny bundle, looking into eyes that somehow held echoes of his father and grandfather, I felt a circle completing. He's beautiful, I whispered, tears of joy streaming down my face. Would you like to feed him? Amanda asked, holding out a prepared bottle. I know I need to rest, and there's no one I trust more. The significance of her words, of the trust being extended, was not lost on me. I accepted the bottle and the precious weight of my grandson, settling into a rocking chair in the corner of the hospital room. As I gazed down at Thomas's perfect face, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here, thorns and all. The next 3 years brought continued growth and healing. Amanda's parents remained somewhat distant, struggling with the couple's declaration of financial independence, but even they softened in the presence of their grandson. James and Amanda purchased a modest home just 15 minutes from mine, allowing for easy visits without encroaching on their privacy. We established new traditions while honoring old ones. Thomas's birthday celebrations included both families. Holidays were navigated with increasingly good humor and flexibility. When Amanda unexpectedly lost her job during a company downsizing, I offered to watch Thomas 3 days a week while she interviewed, and eventually started a new position with better hours but temporarily lower pay. "I don't know how we would have managed without you," she confessed one evening, as I was preparing to leave after a day with Thomas. "My mother suggested a nanny, but you wanted someone who loves him," I finished for her. "Yes," she smiled. "Exactly that." 5 years into James and Amanda's marriage, I began volunteering at a community center, offering support to grandparents, raising grandchildren, or navigating complicated family dynamics. My experience, both the painful confrontation and the subsequent healing, provided perspective that helped others find their way through similar challenges. The key is remembering that love is not a finite resource, I would tell them. A family expands rather than divides when new members join. There's no competition unless we create one. Looking back now, from the vantage point of 7 years since that tumultuous wedding day, I can see how necessary that confrontation was, painful as it felt at the time. By standing my ground with dignity, rather than either retreating or attacking, I helped establish the foundation for the respectful relationship we now enjoy. Amanda and I will never be as close as biological mother and daughter might be, but we have found our own unique connection, built on mutual respect and the shared love of two extraordinary people, James and Thomas. The most valuable wisdom I've gained through this journey is that healthy boundaries are not walls but bridges. They define where one person ends and another begins, not to separate but to clarify, allowing for connection without confusion, closeness without control. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean standing against others. It means honoring your own worthwhile, remaining open to growth and change. The most powerful response to someone who tries to make you feel superfluous is not anger or retreat, but calm assertion of your rightful place, followed by the patience to allow healing to unfold in its own time. Family relationships are never perfect, always evolving. The messy, complicated, sometimes painful connections we share are also our greatest opportunity for growth, for learning the kind of love that endures not because it is easy, but because it is worth fighting for. Have you ever had to navigate challenging family dynamics after a wedding or birth? How did you maintain your dignity while working toward resolution? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if my experience has helped you in any way, please like and subscribe to support more stories of family healing and wisdom. Remember, standing your ground doesn't mean standing alone. We're all in this journey together. Thank you for listening to my story, and may your own family journeys be filled with growth, grace, and ultimately, love.